Salve, Magister Porter sum, scholastici estis, ad Heritage Academy sumus, et lectio incipit est. In the last lesson, we covered how to give answers to yes or no questions. We also learned that just like when you're asking questions, when you're answering, there's no one single way to say yes or no, unfortunately. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about days and times. Previously in class, we talked about the months and the names for the months, and how those are mostly based off of the Roman gods and things like that. Today, though, we're going to get down to how to actually tell time and the days of the week, as well as the days of the months. So let's get started. Before we begin, though, make sure to pause the video when the vocab comes up, take a minute to write down new words or things that you may have forgotten since the last time we did this video, and when you're done, unpause it, come back here, and let's get started. Okay, so first off, we're going to take a look at the days of the month. Now, this can get a little bit complicated, so we won't spend too much time on it, but I did want to include it in this lesson just for the sake of completion. Now let's take a look at the Roman calendar. Each month on the calendar was broken down into 3 primary days. Every other day was counted down as being so many days before the next primary day. I'll get into what that means in just a second, but for now, let's talk about what each of these 3 days are. The first of the 3 primary days is called calendus. Calendus is actually the root word for our English word calendar, so that makes sense. Calendus is the first day of every month. The second primary day in every Roman month was the day called nonus. Nonus was always 8 days before the next primary day, which is called idus. The third primary day, as I mentioned before, is called idus. Idus can be on one of 2 days depending on the length of the month. For shorter months, idus falls on the 13th day of the month. For longer months, idus falls on the 15th day of the month. Earlier I mentioned that every other day besides the 3 primary days are counted down until the next primary day. So what I meant by that is that let's say today was the first day of the month, calendus. Now tomorrow would not be called the second day of the month. Instead, it would be called the 4th day before nonus. The day after that would be the 3rd day before nonus, and the day after that would be the 2nd day before nonus, and so forth. You get the idea. After idus, the days would be counted down until the next calendus, so until the next first day of next month. It's interesting to note, though, that in the Roman calendar system, the first day after each primary day was also considered a bad luck day. They tried not to do really important things on those days, otherwise they felt that they might have bad luck for anything that they were trying to do. Okay, so we've got the days of the month down. Now, let's take a look at the names of the days of the week. Just like with the months, the Romans loved to name things after their gods, and the days of the week are no exception. Let's take a look at that now. The first word we need to learn before we start is dies. That's Latin for day. You see it in the name of every single day of the week. Have you ever heard the phrase carpe diem, seize the day? Diem, in that case, is just the object form of the word dies, day. Sunday, in Latin, is dies solis. Solis is the sun, so dies solis is the day of the sun. That makes sense. Let's look now at Monday. Monday in Latin is dies lunae. Now, we've learned already that luna means moon, so dies lunae, or day of the moon, makes a lot of sense when we think of Monday, moon day, right? Unfortunately, the next few days of the week don't line up quite as nicely with our English calendar as the previous ones did. Tuesday is dies Martis. Martis being another form of the word Mars, so dies Martis is the day of Mars. What we call Wednesday was actually in Latin dies Mercurii, or day of Mercury. Thursday in Latin is dies Iovis. Iovis in Latin was another word for Jupiter. And this makes a lot of sense because Jupiter and Thor, which is where we get our Thursdays from, were actually very closely related in terms of mythology. So this makes a lot of sense that we can see some similarities there. Friday in Latin was dies Veneris. Veneris was another word for Venus. So dies Veneris is the day of Venus. And finally, getting to Saturday, is dies Saturnus. Saturnus is Saturn, so dies Saturnus is the day of Saturn. This one actually gets us back on with our English names, right? Saturn and Saturday are very similar. So as you can see, our Sunday, Monday, and Saturday actually directly derive their names from Latin and the Roman calendar. Okay, so far we've discussed the days of the month and days of the week. But how about telling time within the day? We can learn this too. Now there are a couple things we need to talk about first before we get to telling time. Just like with everything else we do, there's always a couple things to know. The first thing to know is that Latin time did not include minutes because it was actually impossible to tell distinct minutes until the mechanical clock, and that wasn't invented until sometime later. So, although we might be able to translate something into minutes, they didn't actually use minutes when they were telling time back in the Roman days. The second thing we need to know is that the Latin day was separated into two parts, morning and afternoon, and noon was the dividing line. This makes a lot of sense actually when we look at the way that we tell time with our AM and PM system. Let's start with that actually. So just like with us, the Roman day was divided into two. The morning time was called AM, and the evening time, or afternoon, was called PM. So noon was the middle of the day. And there's a reason that we call it AM and PM actually. AM comes from the Latin phrase ante meridiem. Ante means before, and meridiem was what they called noon. So ante meridiem is before noon. PM is the same idea. PM, the P in PM stands for post. Post means after. So just like when you're writing a letter and you have the postscript is the thing that comes after your letter, post meridiem, or PM, means after noon. In English, when we're telling the hour, we say it this way: 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and so forth. In Latin, it would look like this: hora, and then you insert the number of the ordinal, ante meridiem, or post meridiem. So what that looks like, hora, as we've already learned, means hour. So hora is to say hour, and then you insert here the ordinal. Remember, those ordinal numbers are 1 through 10 of putting things in order. So for example, primus, secundus, tertius, quartus, and so forth. Now, you would say, for example, hora prima ante meridiem. That is basically saying 1 a.m. Now it's important to note here that we change the end of the ordinal number to be an A to match with the word hora, because hora is a feminine word, and I got into this a little bit when we discussed matching the endings of nouns to the rest of the sentence. So because hora is hour and it's a feminine word, the ending of primus or secundus or tertius has to also be feminine to match. So instead of primus, it's prima. Secundus is secunda, and so forth. One thing that's important to know here is that the Romans didn't actually start their hours at the first hour after midnight like we do. So for example, what I said before, hora prima ante meridium, is not actually 1 a.m. Instead, they started their days when the sun came up, which for them was somewhere between 6 and 7 a.m. So let's say on a certain time of the year, hora prima ante meridium could start at 6 a.m. And then the second hour would be from 7 to 8, the third hour would be from 8 to 9, and so forth until they got to noon. That took about 6 hours, so they didn't have to go up to 12 in their numbering system, they only went to 1 to 6 for the hours. After noon, it would start with hora prima post meridium, which would take them from noon to 1 p.m., and then so on until 6 p.m. After 6 p.m., they actually had a different naming system for all of the night hours, and those were vigila noctis. So they would say the same thing, hora prima vigila noctis. Now that would go from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., so they did use 12 hours in the nighttime. Vigila noctis, by the way, means night watch, so essentially it was a way for the military to know who was keeping watch at which hours of the night. Alright, so this has been a lot of information in your face really quickly. We're going to stop this video here. But before I go, there's 3 more words that I want to talk about that are going to become very important in our Latin vocabulary. The first of those 3 words is the word hodie. Hodie means today. If we want to say yesterday, that word is heri. Now, we've said yesterday and today. The next word is going to be kras, which is tomorrow. And by the way, kras has another form, which is krastino, which is actually the root word of our English word procrastinate. It makes sense that the day for putting something off would be tomorrow, right? Anyway, that's all for this lesson. Until next time, qui nunquale. Goodbye for now.